Welcome to UN Insider. I'm Elaine Reyes at the United Nations headquarters in New York. Join us as we delve into the world's most pressing issues and learn how the people inside work toward a better future for everyone around the world.
Coming up on UN Insider.
The way forward is clear. A humanitarian ceasefire now.
There are a number of innocent lives under the rubble today.
No one is safe. More UN aid workers and journalists have been killed in 4 weeks than in any month of a conflict in decades.
A month of fighting, thousands of lives lost, and millions caught in a humanitarian crisis. The UN issues urgent calls for a pause in the conflict between Israel and Hamas.
Safely harnessing this technology could eclipse anything we have ever known.
Artificial intelligence presenting a very real dilemma. The UN and world leaders tackle questions surrounding the fast-moving world of AI. Out of the landfill and into the fuel tank, how one man is repurposing plastic waste. Next.
The conflict raging in the Middle East remains a key concern for the UN. Israel says it expects a long and difficult fight with Hamas inside of Gaza. Meanwhile, conditions for civilians in the Palestinian territory are dire. The conflict between Israel and Hamas has raged on for 1 month, and there is no sign of an end to the fighting. Israeli forces are pushing into Gaza City on a mission to root out Hamas and destroy the group's network of underground tunnels. Some of those tunnels, believed to run beneath schools and hospitals, are putting civilians and UN workers in harm's way.
As WHO, we cannot verify what is under the hospitals. What we can verify is what is in the hospitals and on above ground. And these are urgently needed medical facilities, the only shelter places, the only leftover places for any type of decency and normalcy for people already in distress and wounded and homeless.
As fighting grows more intense, thousands of Palestinians are fleeing Gaza's north on foot, and basic supplies are scarce.
This is a humanitarian issue of the highest importance.
Some aid is getting into Gaza, but workers on the ground say it is not nearly enough.
Food and water are running out. A steady flow of aid is needed to meet the desperate needs now. Humanitarians must be able to deliver it safely, and civilians must be able to reach it safely.
The UN continues to call for a pause in the fighting and increased access into Gaza to address the humanitarian crisis.
We must have those pauses. We must have those pauses. If we do not have pauses, we will not keep up with the needs of the people of Gaza and the Israelis also caught up in those areas of conflict.
Shu Deja is monitoring developments inside the halls of the United Nations. Deja.
Yes, Elaine, as Israeli ground operations started in Gaza City, Gaza conflict entered a new phase. But sadly, it seems so far no one could really make a difference to make it stop. Now this week, Security Council is still in consultation of the situation in Gaza. After the consultation on Monday, the Chinese permanent representative to the United Nations, Ambassador Zhang Jun, and the UAE permanent representative to the UN, Ambassador Lana Nusabe, made a joint statement and urged for a humanitarian ceasefire.
We call for an urgent humanitarian ceasefire. The Secretary General just made the same call this morning, a humanitarian ceasefire now. This is desperately needed to enable full, rapid, safe, and unhindered humanitarian access, including for UN and humanitarian personnel, consistent with international humanitarian law. We urge all parties to take steps urgently towards a cessation of hostilities to ensure the protection of civilians. We demand that the parties to the conflict facilitate the continuous, sufficient, and unhindered provision of essential goods and services to all civilians throughout the Gaza Strip. These must include electricity, water, fuel, food, and medical supplies sustained and at scale.
We know that the U.S. announced that Israel is going to have daily 4-hour pauses for evacuation. Many of my colleagues in the briefing room on Thursday asked the reaction of the Secretary General of the United Nations. It seems that the UN believes it doesn't really offer enough conditions for real humanitarian work.
I mean, how any such halt in the fighting and how it would work for humanitarian purposes would need to be coordinated with the United Nations, especially on the issue of timings and location. And obviously, in order for this to be done safely for humanitarian purposes, it would have to be agreed with all parties to the conflict to be truly effective.
Also on Thursday, UNDP and ESCWA launched a new rapid assessment called the Gaza War, Expected Socio-Economic Impacts on the State of Palestine. The report suggests if the war in Gaza continues for a second month, the poverty rate in the State of Palestine will soar by 34%, thrusting nearly 500,000 additional people into poverty, as the GDP plummets by 8.4%, a loss of $1.7 billion.
If this fight continues till the end of the second month, the loss will be more than 8% of GDP. And if it continues till the end of the year, we are going to have a 12% loss in GDP. Just to bring it to you, a comparison, Ukraine lost 30% of GDP in 1.5 years of fighting. To lose 12% of GDP in 3 months, that's massive and unprecedented. Along with that, a loss of 390,000 jobs already lost, and an increase of the poverty by more than 400,000 people. Actually, 500,000 people would join the poverty lines by the end of the second month of fighting. Now, even more important, if I may say, is the loss to human development. After 2 months of fighting, Palestine, and not just Gaza, would have lost 16 years of human development. Health and education and infrastructure and economic growth, that would be wiped out. Palestine would go back to 2005. All the investments, all the work, all the hard work of the international community and the Palestinian people will be lost since 2005.
Unfortunately, there's still no end in sight of this conflict, so we just hope what the report predicts won't be true. Elaine.
Shudaja, thanks.
Coming up.
AI is likely to be the best or worst thing to happen to humanity.
UN Insider.
We are CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Game-changing technology that holds promise for unprecedented developments, but could lead to potential harm. The UN is trying to find ways to harness the power of artificial intelligence while avoiding the pitfalls. Secretary General Antonio Guterres says AI must be used responsibly and must be accessible around the world.
As things stand, AI expertise is concentrated in a handful of companies and countries. And this could deepen global inequalities and turn digital divides into chasms. The potential harms of AI extend to serious concerns over misinformation and disinformation, the entrenching of bias and discrimination, surveillance and invasion of privacy, fraud and other violations of human rights.
The Secretary General has introduced an advisory body on artificial intelligence. The group is expected to make preliminary recommendations on AI risks, governance, and using the technology to accelerate the Sustainable Development Goals. Those recommendations are expected by the end of the year. Tech leaders and government officials from around the world came together for a global AI summit in London. The goal, building international consensus on the future of artificial intelligence.
The UK is proud to have brought the world together and hosted the first summit. But it requires an ongoing international process to stay ahead of the curve on the science and to see through all the collaboration that we have begun today. So we have agreed that Bletchley Park should be the first of a series of international safety summits, with both Korea and France agreeing to host further summits next year. The late Stephen Hawking once said, AI is likely to be the best or worst thing to happen to humanity. If we can sustain the collaboration that we have fostered over these last 2 days, I profoundly believe that we can make it the best. Because safely harnessing this technology could eclipse anything we have ever known.
I'm very, very proud that this first AI safety summit, first global AI safety summit, has the US, has China, has the EU, has the UK, but also has a number of voices from the developing world, and that is incredibly important. I'm very proud that we've got that real diversity of voice.
Here in the US, there is a lot of debate over what students should learn in history classes. The state of Florida banned an advanced African American history class. One teacher took her concerns about Florida's policies all the way to the UN's Human Rights Committee in Geneva. Nitza Soledad Perez has the story.
My name is Renee O'Connor, and I'm a proud educator in my 13th year of teaching in a predominantly black high school in Miami Gardens, Florida.
An African-American history teacher from Florida traveled to Geneva to voice her complaints about Florida's educational standards before the United Nations Human Rights Committee.
This year, the Florida government banned the teaching of advanced placement African-American history in Florida. This both harms black students as well as other students and delegitimizes the field of African-American studies. For me, the biggest affront came this summer when the new Florida curriculum standards around African-American history were passed and included some nonsense quotes such as, "Slaves developed skills which in some instances could be applied for their personal benefit," end quote.
Renee O'Connor, who was nominated for Miami-Dade Public Schools Teacher of the Year in 2022, is currently on sabbatical. She says she could not keep teaching under the current circumstances.
And the only time changes happen in America is when people have stood up for their rights and demanded a change. So this is the way that I'm standing up on an international scale to let them know what is happening in Florida, in hopes that people will register to vote and demand that students, not only in Miami, students not only in Florida, but the United States, are taught the truth about this country.
Members of Florida's Community Justice Project invited O'Connor to travel to Switzerland with a group representing Florida's civil society. They came armed with a report claiming that Florida's policies stoke fear in marginalized communities, restrict freedom of expression, stifle truth in education, and attack immigrant communities.
The main goal that really we wanted to have out of the UN is to amplify the stories of what's happening here in Florida. At the very least, begin any sort of investigation or consider any intervening steps that really could be had on behalf of Florida citizens.
As for the Florida governor, he believes his policies should be emulated.
We're the model for success in education. We're the model for success in having low crime. We're the model for success in having economic opportunity.
Back in Geneva, after they presented their grievances to the UN committee, the U.S. UN delegation took about a day to analyze them.
How was that message received, in your opinion?
We just felt that the United States did not intend to come to really solve any issues.
Many of the activists couldn't help but showed their disappointment.
It resulted in kind of a spontaneous protest of the U.S. civil society members standing up and turning their backs on the U.S. delegation at the end of their closing remarks, so that they understood that although you were closing, we haven't received the responses that we wanted. And so we wanted to be clear that we expect better answers from the United States government that sees itself as a beacon of democracy throughout the world.
Despite the tepid response from U.S. officials, these organizers, having directly impacted people on the international stage, raising their concerns as to what's happening here in Florida, consider their trip to Geneva a success. Nitza Soledad Perez, CGTN, Miami.
Coming up.
We pick refuse, mostly waste plastic, waste biomass, and we turn that into usable fuel.
UN Insider.
Whether it's about your education, the home you live in, or the items you buy, your money has a story to tell. Because every business story is a human story. Global Business.
No war, no one again began holding guns. Word protesters.
Were you worried about your life at that particular time?
Not at all.
Excellency, thank you very much for your time. What is your assessment of the state of the continent today?
Africa has the potential to power itself.
Excuse me.
The increase in climate events around the world is impacting people in a number of ways. Scientists are growing concerned about the toll it can take on our mental health. Hendrik Sabrandi explains.
We get frequent reminders, it seems, about how global warming is disrupting life on our planet. For many of us, these kinds of events provoke severe anxiety.
I experience eco-anxiety daily. When I'm listening to the news, when I'm thinking about my kids and their future.
For Catherine Erstad and Asher Reed, there's worry and dismay.
What is our future going to look like? The science does not have a great trajectory, and that is scary.
New data shows 38% of U.S. adults have experienced some eco-anxiety or fear of environmental doom. The trend is showing up in the headlines. Mental health professionals are seeing it more and more.
Pretty escalated, like suicidal ideation, panic attacks, so some pretty heightened mental health symptoms, not just some mild anxiety or some mild hopelessness.
This new phenomenon has lots of different names: ecological grief, eco-trauma, eco-angst, climate change distress. Whatever you call it, it's very much on the University of Denver's radar.
All of these emotions that people feel around global environmental change and around the ecological crisis are absolutely a natural and okay response to what is happening.
Julia Senecal is helping the school bring the issue to the forefront with classes and workshops like this one. Young people are particularly susceptible to eco-distress. A 2021 global study found that 59% of those aged 16 to 25 were extremely worried about climate change. DU's Graduate School of Social Work is training future climate therapists like Erstad.
I mean, there are going to be people that are going to be displaced from their homes. There are going to be people that are not able to live the career that they wanted to live. I expect that there's going to be a huge need.
You've got to look the beast in the face and say, I want to be a part of the solution.
Reed, who's also studying climate therapy, believes the problem must be tackled head on.
There's a lot of silence around climate emotions. It's still an odd thing to talk about. It's still not mainstream and often silenced.
Her teachers say getting involved on the climate front can also help lower distress.
What we're finding is social connection and action can be really helpful.
There's lots of work to be done.
I'll be very happy if I'm not needed. That will be great.
That's unlikely. As global warming continues to advance, this climate therapist may be quite secure in her future career. Hendrik Sabrandi, CGTN, Denver. Plastic is everywhere. It's useful and convenient, but also a serious threat to the environment. The UN estimates the equivalent of 2,000 garbage trucks full of plastic are dumped into the world's oceans, rivers, and lakes every day. But some people are coming up with innovative ways to repurpose plastic. One man in Kenya is turning it into fuel. Wanja Mungai shows us how.
This backyard in Kenya's Murang'a County is a hive of activity. About 55 kilometers from central Nairobi, this fiery furnace and its molding briquettes are helping James Murray to turn trash into treasure. He says he has found a revolutionary way to make practical use of everyday waste.
We pick refuse, mostly waste plastic, waste biomass, and we turn that into usable fuel.
Mureto's background is in IT, but he developed an interest in chemical engineering over the years. His approach to plastic waste is progressive as he solves more than one problem. He's not just helping to clean the environment, but he's creating jobs in the process. He buys waste from collectors who go door to door in the area, asking residents to turn it over. For each kilogram, he pays 25 Kenya shillings, or approximately 17 US cents. Mureto explains how it works from here.
Plastic is a waste that has not been fully leveraged, if I might say that. One, the amount of plastic being recycled, it's very minimal. I think less than 10%. So once the waste has been collected, it needs to be shredded. So shredding meaning cutting into small pieces. Once you've shredded it, you need to think about cleaning it up. Once you've cleaned it up, then you need to load it into the far right side. That's a reactor. You load it, you close it up. You have to ensure there is no oxygen, and then you heat it up.
After hours of heating, it's time to harvest the fuel. In just 1 week, he says he can generate about 300 liters depending on demand. However, he aspires to produce nearly 20 times that number. For now, he's making do with supplying his neighbors who are lapping it up. Haron Kamau, a thorn melon farmer, uses it to power the water pump which irrigates his farm.
Per day, 10 liters.
This fuel has really come in handy for me. I have been able to save money because, first of all, it works efficiently and I spend less. With Murito's fuel, I spend 10 liters a week. Previously, with conventional fuel, I used to spend about 15 liters for the same amount of work.
Maybe 800.
You can use plastics, you can use tires, you can use anything like that. And it is because those products are made from fuel anyway in the first place. That's where they come from. So all you're doing is you're taking them back to where they came from. Now, when you do the initial pyrolysis, you get what is called heavy fuel that can be used for boilers and so forth. And then you have to distill it to get out the diesel. And that's all you can get out of pyrolysis. You cannot get petrol. It's only diesel that you can get. And that diesel has got a different characteristic from the diesel that comes from normal hydrocarbon. So it can work in a car. But if you have 100% of that particular fuel, then the more modern engines may suffer because they are very sensitive on some of the lubricating qualities that the diesel has got. So depending on the kind of engine you have, yes, some engines can run.
It seems it does work. For a limited amount of engines, Murito's innovation comes at a time when fuel prices in Kenya, like in many parts of the world, are uncomfortably high. Murito is yet to commercialize his fuel, But his ingenuity will certainly be welcomed by millions of Kenyans who are desperate for alternative and affordable fuel. Wanja Mungai, CGTN.
I'm Elaine Reyes at UN headquarters in New York. Thanks for being a UN insider.